Greetings to everyone. I'm here and I'm witnessing something extraordinary. I know, without any further ado, one of our chief elders of Wadani, a very significant individual in our midst, most highly praised, highly blessed Lord. As my eye just behold, members of the Ethiopian Orthodox faith is within our presence, my beloved General. So without any, I just turn the microphone to the elder.
Give thanks, Father. Greetings to everybody present. And thank you very much, Rastafari, for inviting me today. I will opening remarks. First of all, let me express welcome, greetings, and welcome to all of the sisters who have come here from overseas. It's my working. Yeah. Travel here from your respective islands or continents, as the case might be, to be with us on this occasion. Now I see here that today's reason is about cannabis, and I just want to mention that in about almost 40 years ago in this country, almost 40 years ago, sometime in the early 1980s, the Rastafari brethren reached out to the then Prime Minister, V.C. Byrd. He has passed away, of course, since then. The movement reached out to V.C. Byrd to put to him that given the sacramental use and importance of cannabis, of ganja, and given the rapidly growing population of Rastafari then in Antigua and Barbuda, and of course the atmosphere of prohibition then, which was so suppressing and oppressing to Rastafari and others, the prohibition of cannabis, we reached out to V.C. Byrd as Prime Minister and suggested to him that he should use his good offices as Prime Minister to decriminalize and legalize cannabis. His answer was very interesting. Now this is in the 1980s. Consider where the world was then in terms of white supremacy, the rampancy of white supremacy, still rampant today of course, and the rigidity and the rigor with which the prohibition of ganja was being prosecuted. In that context, the answer, V.C. Byrd's answer to us was that he could not do that. And the reason he could not do that was that Antigua, a small nation, could not legalize ganja or decriminalize ganja while countries like Britain and America and Canada had such dreadful laws going against the herb. Laws which of course were duplicated and replicated here in Antigua and Barbuda. V.C. Byrd's answer was that he would have to wait until countries like England and America decriminalize and or legalize ganja before he could even think of doing something like that. Now bear in mind that this was the elected head of a sovereign, independent nation, speaking like that. And I say that to make the point that historically and up until now, this lack of confidence, this lack of self-esteem that black leaders are characterized by in this world is very striking. Sovereignty, by international law, sovereignty is equal and indivisible. You do not have big sovereignty and little sovereignty.
Aye.
Independence, legally by international law, is an equal status for all independent nations. You are not more important because you are a big independent nation and I'm a small independent nation. When we gather together around the table of international discourse, theoretically and legally, all of us are equal. We enjoyed sovereignty, we enjoyed independence on paper, but in actual fact, our leaders were not willing to demonstrate to the world that they had the power as independent sovereigns. They had the power to control affairs, totally control the affairs of their nation, internally in particular, without the interference of other nations. And this, of course, is the bedrock of international law, non-interference in the affairs of independent states. What could we do when the Prime Minister was telling us, well, I understand your position, but I cannot do that until the white supremacists have decided to do it for themselves. Decades passed, we were persecuted, we were murdered, we were put in jail, lives were destroyed, and families were destroyed because of that prohibition. Something that our leadership, our independent sovereign leadership, was unwilling to do anything about because they felt themselves inferior to the bigger nations. They felt that they were afraid to ruffle the feathers of the big boys in London, in Washington, in Ottawa, as the case might be. Decades later, here we are today. Various states in America have legalized cannabis. Canada is the second country in the world, apart from Uruguay, after Uruguay, to have completely legalized it for recreational, medical uses, whatever. Now that that has happened, just as V.C. Bird had intimated, the timid, quisling leaderships of countries like Antigua and Jamaica and other black nations have run up to the table to say, I will legalize it too, because you, the big white supremacists, have now done so. This is totally unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable. And I say that to make the point that it is because of this unwillingness of black leaders to accept the power, the political power that the populations have put in their hands, and to understand that power in the international context and in the context of international law and global affairs, their unwillingness to comprehend their situation in the world that has the black nation globally in the position that we're in today. As mendicants, begging all around for money to subsidize our national budgets, as leaders who are unable to grapple and come to grips with the very dreadful problems that persist in so many of our countries today. And I say that because I'm looking at the black world globally. We look at our beloved continent, our ancestral continent. The wars do not cease. The stupid civil wars do not cease. In fact, they seem to multiply. Look at Cameroon today, at peace and one of the most peaceful and developing, well-developing nations in Africa up to maybe 3-4 years ago. Today it is engulfed with a terrible fratricidal war between those who speak English and those who speak French. A simple matter like that. I talk English, you talk French. We are in a bilingual nation called Cameroon, and outside forces, as is always the case with these stupid wars in Africa, outside forces look for every little division they can find in the society to impose themselves and create division and strife, violence, mayhem, and suffering on the ordinary people of the country. Sudan, so promising, when they gained their independence, that is South Sudan, a few years ago. could possibly be one of the richest countries in Africa because of its abundance of oil and agricultural resources, engulfed in civil war. Women and children, girls being raped daily, murders at the order of the day, Somalia, an ungovernable place, and the list goes on and on with respect to the African countries. Congo, what bigger sore on the face of Africa than the Republic of Congo? Potentially perhaps one of the richest countries in the world. Where is Congo today? Just out of the most horrible civil war where over 3 million people were killed, and many having died by starvation. And it goes on and on. Libya, absolutely destroyed. A country which had the highest standard of living in Africa. Potentially one of the wealthiest countries per capita in the world. A country which had no debt, which had vast reserves of gold. Where is Libya today? Its leader assassinated by the orders of President Sarkozy of France, and that woman who was Clinton, who was, what was she at the time? Secretary of State. Sarkozy and her got together and decided this African leader must be killed because what he's doing is going to take Africa too far down the road, true sovereignty and independence. Today, Libya is destroyed, and as I say, it goes on and on. Mauritania, you can count them all. This is the state of affairs we're in, where we are afraid to assert ourselves according to the rights that we are given by international law, which rights other nations enjoy and use to their own advantage. Photo of a warehouse in Canada that is owned by one of the cannabis producers. And they had pictures of the inside of this warehouse where they had a storage of cannabis, of cured cannabis. And they were saying in that news item that the amount of cannabis in that warehouse, just in that single warehouse, was 500 billion US dollars. 500 million, US dollars worth of cannabis. 500 million US dollars worth of cured cannabis in a warehouse in Canada. I don't know how long it will take us to produce $500 million worth of cannabis in Antigua and Barbuda. But I say that to demonstrate that if we think that we are going to catch up as a nation, we are going to use this agricultural resource to get into export markets and to make vast amounts of money, etc., for the government, for the people, etc., to develop the country. It may be that we are mistaken. It may be that we are too late. It may be that what I consider to be the single most overriding motive for the decriminalization and legalization of ganja in Antigua and Barbuda, which is an economic motive on the part of the government, not a motive having anything to do with hatred of oppression against Rasta and others, not a motive having to do with wanting to create a level playing field, a peaceful atmosphere for Rasta to thrive. It simply has to do, on the examination, you will find out it has to do with the fact that certain governments just do not know, just don't understand how to develop their nations economically. They are highly indebted. Their various economic policies and fiscal policies have failed, so their countries are on the brink virtually of economic collapse. And it is in this atmosphere that certain governments are looking to cannabis as a resource that can save them from economic collapse and save their government from the consequences of economic collapse, which of course is the fall of the government itself. So we should not delude ourselves in our analysis of the situation and in our understanding of what we are up against. Because if we are not careful, if we are not, well, forthright in our presentations, it may well be that whatever the benefits that could come from this new movement will not be shared to any great extent by ourselves. I say these words from a cautionary perspective, not to diminish any euphoria or any happiness we might have about this change in circumstances, because certainly all oppression must cease. And the Rastafari movement from the beginning was and is a movement against oppression, principally of black people, but of people everywhere. Rasta is a movement against oppression. And for daring to rise our heads and condemn oppression and agitate against oppression locally and globally, we have suffered more than any other social group in the Caribbean. We have been excluded, we have been marginalized, we have been pauperized, we have been killed. And now today that the white supremacists have decided that they will no longer tolerate their children being victimized by police forces for a herb that is perhaps more beneficial than most herbs, for a herb that has clear advantages in many aspects of application, including medicine and healthcare. It is because the tables were turning, and that over the past several years, it is white youths who were advocating for legalization, for the right to use herb, etc. The white power structure decided the time had come. In addition to the fact that the greedy capitalists saw so much money in front of them out of this industry, it was as a result of that that Canada, the United States, and other Western white nations have moved to this position where we are today. So, once more, we are here in the back seat, as it were, and we need to maneuver ourselves and stand for the rights that are given to us by natural law, by our Creator. We need to maneuver ourselves into a position where, if there are indeed economic benefits to be made from the legalization of cannabis, then certainly such benefits must be open to all equally. I am quite unhappy with the legislation as it is, because my view is that a plant is a plant is a plant is a plant, and just that you cannot legalize to tell me I can only have 6 or 4 sugarcane plants in my yard, or I can't have more than 4 mango trees in my yard. I reject the notion that you can come and properly and correctly legalize for me that I cannot have more than 4 cannabis plants in my yard. I take the view that cannabis should be a cash crop, like any other potential cash crop, like sugar cane, like cotton, like aloe vera. It should be a cash crop that any agriculturist may choose to grow. And the proceeds of his harvest should be sold perhaps to a marketing board, a national marketing board, which in alliance with the Ministry of Agriculture would have their various extension and field officers who can liaise and engage with the farmers to ensure the correct quality and the correct strength and so forth of the cannabis that they wish to buy. So with those few words, I put my position on the table. I think we are still being disadvantaged. I think we have been oppressed and advantaged for too long with this matter, and I think the battle is still on for us to have a regime surrounding the cannabis planting and usage, for us to have a regime that is really quite and totally acceptable to us all. Thank you.
Giving thanks to Brother Ivy.